BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
All right, settle down. I'm Gabriel Gatehouse. You're listening to Seriously from BBC Radio 4. This is the final part of our special series called The Puppet Master. We're on the trail of Mr. Black Square, the man who conjures new realities out of nowhere. He's the most powerful man you've never heard of, but he's got enemies. When we last left him, Vladislav Surkov was in trouble. Tens of thousands of people, the young, the middle class, the liberals of Russia, were out on the streets of Moscow, demonstrating against the system of fake democracy that he'd created. The puppets he once controlled had taken on a life of their own, and meanwhile, enemies were circling.
Я думаю, что все были его противниками внутри Кремля.
I think everyone was his enemy inside the Kremlin.
Gleb Pavlovsky, who worked with him.
Его никогда не любили.
They never liked him. He was too bright, too brazen, too clever, too cutting.
Let's quickly remind ourselves who we're talking about here. Vladislav Surkov, Putin's Rasputin, some called him. We've spoken to friends, we've spoken to foes, but we haven't heard from the man himself. He rarely gives interviews, but I asked for one anyway. Dear Mr. Surkov, I think by now you're aware that we're making a series of programmes about you for the BBC. The title is The Puppet Master. I'm thinking of adding a subtitle, The Man Who Made the Post-Truth World. Is that a bit too much? We'd love to hear from you. So, back to the streets. Moscow, in the winter of 2011. These were the largest protests since the fall of the Soviet Union. It was a battle for the soul of Russia. Continued liberalization under President Medvedev, or a return to authoritarianism under Putin. The outcome would have a profound effect far beyond Russia.
It was a signal of a real social conflict after the decision of Putin to go back to President place.
That's Oleg Kashin, the journalist who was nearly beaten to death in the last episode. Surkov, by now, had amassed great power as deputy chief of staff in the Kremlin.
Surkov invented this position, but he spent about half of his energy, half of his time to make his personal reputation.
Of course, he modelled himself on Russian literature.
He wanted the image of mysterious and very high-educated culture like Voland from Master and Margarita, Kremlin devil.
Voland, the evil mastermind in the Soviet novel Master and Margarita. Kashin tells a story about an MP and friend of his that sums up Surkov's position.
He works with Surkov in media, and he had a portrait of Putin in his office, but if you take it from the wall and turn around, you can see a portrait of Surkov.
I love this story. A double portrait in an MP's office. The two faces of Putinism. The Tsar and the power behind the throne. But this was a dangerous game. The Kremlin is a place of intrigue, of alliances and betrayals, backroom plots. But there are rules.
Россия сейчас неоднородна.
Russia isn't a monolith.
Andrei Kalyadin is a former insider.
Не Путин принимает окончательные решения.
Putin doesn't take every last decision. Those decisions are fought over in the corridors of power between factions in the Kremlin. But none of those factions raises its head above the power of the president. There are lines which are not crossed.
But in December 2011, it was unclear who was really in charge. On paper, Medvedev was president. Remember, he and Putin swapped jobs in 2008. And now they were about to swap back. But
according to Russian constitution, president could fire prime minister for a second. Just sign the decree and Putin is zero.
That's Andranik Migranyan. As a long-term advisor to the Kremlin, he could see that Medvedev would never wield the knife.
Medvedev didn't have the guts to do that. It's a coup, you know. Though you are formally the president, but you are not really the president because Putin was so strong.
And that's why these protests were such a big deal. In Surkov's system, nothing could ever be spontaneous. So the hardliners around Putin suspected a plot. Ilya Ponomaryov, the opposition MP, remembers.
These security guys, they tried to brainwash Putin that it was Medvedev who was orchestrating everything, but Medvedev is so powerless. So who was the mastermind? Of course, Surkov, you know, who had to be his hands and his brains, you know, and then the architect, of course, Surkov.
And do you think Putin believed that?
I think that for a moment, most likely, yes.
Was Surkov fomenting a coup? Oleg Kashin thinks it's possible.
Maybe it was a real Surkov mistake. He wanted Medvedev for president.
Others think that too.
Can you imagine if that was successful? Then he could be President Medvedev, but real runner of the game could be himself.
Surely Surkov was far too clever. He wouldn't make an overt move against Putin. But the protests grew and grew, and the man who was supposed to be pulling the strings seemed unable, or perhaps unwilling, to rein them in.
As a theater director, he was thinking about himself as the guy who is running the show, and he is trying to find the place of every actor in his play and performance.
But to what end? To help the liberals? To keep control? No one could figure it out.
And that's a fashion created and nourished by Surkov was this flavor of postmodernism, that nothing is true. There is no truth. There are alternative truths.
But this was no time for ambiguity. Putin had had enough, and Surkov's days were numbered.
Как говорил в свое время...
As Lenin once said about Stalin, he had gathered in his hands unlimited power. That worried Putin.
So in December 2011, with the protests still going, Surkov lost his job in the Kremlin. His reign as puppet master was at an end. After 12 years as artistic director and effective controller of Russian politics, he was out. His parting shot: I am too odious a figure for this brave new world. But he had further to fall. In a typical twist, his sacking was also a promotion. He was appointed Deputy Prime Minister of Russia. It was a position with less power, but his enemies wanted him gone for good. And with Putin's suspicions raised, they scented blood. First, they quashed the protests. Then they put pressure on Ilya Ponomaryov, the opposition MP. They wanted him to testify that Surkov was behind it all.
I was offered a deal that you just sign on this, you would stay just as a witness, you will never be prosecuted. You know, it will be all after him. He's your political enemy. So he will be sent to jail. That's what you demanded all the time on the streets of Moscow. You know, we will send him to jail. Just sign here. No, I will not do it.
Remember the Surkov mantra. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. It sounds like you were, in a way, slightly attached to him. Did you have an emotional kind of connection?
No, it was just not fair. No, he has done a lot of harm for Russian political system. He put his talent, I mean, he's obviously a talented guy, but he put his talent to work for evil.
Evil?
Absolutely. And, of course, you know, I totally hate him for this.
Surkov was spared jail, but he was sacked, and this time for real. But wait, we're not done yet. Less than a year later, a short story appeared in a Moscow literary magazine. The title was Without Sky. It described a dystopian future in the aftermath of a hybrid war. Here's an extract.
It was the first non-linear war. 4 coalitions collided, not 2 against 2 or 3 against 1. No, all against all. It was rare for whole countries to enter. A few provinces would join one side, a few others a different one.
The story was written under a pseudonym. Ring any bells? Remember the play Almost Zero that exposed the inner workings of Russian politics? Same author. Mr. Black Square was back. And with a nod and a wink, he was again lifting the curtain to reveal another plot. Moscow's little green men had just annexed Crimea, and they were about to move on eastern Ukraine. Our story has come full circle.
This can probably take some time.
Alia Chandra is a Ukrainian researcher. She spent the last 2 years combing through a cache of hacked emails. Surkov had a new job in the Kremlin, and the emails came from his office. She shows me a sample message.
December 1, Surkov gets a list of ideas that could be done in Odessa.
Surkov was running a network of pro-Russian activists in Ukraine. He was still up to his old tricks.
All the activities have price tags. Some really creative ones were effigies that they made of Prime Minister Yatsenyuk and Petro Poroshenko.
The president?
The president, yes.
Right, so like dolls, effigies hanging from trees.
Effigies hanging from the tree. And
by their necks. The cost for this macabre bit of political theatre? $3,600.
Before this happened, Surkov received photographs of how these effigies looked. And after that, a press monitoring report telling him which media outlets covered.
Is this what it's come to? The puppet master, reduced to commissioning scarecrows, dolls, from Ukrainian activists? It may look like amateur theatricals, but don't get complacent.
One of the strategies that Russia uses in Ukraine, as it does in Western countries, is denigrating the Ukrainian government, making Ukrainians hate their government. And this they're very successful because Ukrainians like to hate their governments.
It's a technique known as reflexive control.
The basis of this is to understand your opponent good enough to manipulate his view of the world in order for your opponent to make the decisions willingly, on his own will, that benefit you. So that basically is a puppet master of the highest degree, with the puppet not even understanding what you're doing.
It's not just Ukraine. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the oligarch who hired Surkov as a bodyguard and later went to jail, he now lives in exile. He's set up an organization which aims to expose Russian manipulations around the world. He didn't want to give us an interview, but his people did show me some documents. More emails from the inbox of a senior Kremlin official. The documents show Moscow running networks on a vast scale, recruiting and managing activists and influencers across Europe, from Germany to Poland, from Italy to the Baltics. Their activities range from staging fake demonstrations to infiltrating national parliaments. Surkov's efforts in Ukraine are a small part of this operation. The puppet master has become just another cog in a machine that he invented. Here's Andrei Kalyadin, the former Kremlin insider.
It seems to me that this populism, which brought in Trump, Brexit, and the many politicians in the West who are capturing huge electoral masses with their ideas, one of the authors of this was Surkov. He created this state of mind, political spectacle which didn't represent anything real.
So this world we're all living in, of polarization, fake news, confusion, Surkov was a pioneer. One thing still bothers me. If Putin suspected Surkov of treachery, of organizing the demonstrations against him, why bring him back? Andranik Migranyan.
Keep your friends close to you, but your enemies even closer, which means Putin thought this guy having this brains, driving force, guts, everything, he could be more dangerous outside than inside.
Yeah, you'd rather have him inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in.
I just wanted to say exactly the same.
Machiavellian is Illuminati all through your body. The blows like a 12-gauge shot. Feel me?
Today, Vladislav Surkov is under US and EU sanctions, banned from travelling to the land of Tupac and Ginsburg because of his role in the annexation of Crimea and the ongoing war in eastern Ukraine. Ilya Ponomaryov last spoke to him just after the sanctions were imposed. What were your impressions of his mood?
He was complaining that he wanted to leave the government service. He said that he wanted to go into business, that he tried, but Putin did not allow him to. I think he is very much in this golden cage. He is the Mr. Evil, so he has nowhere to go.
What do we have here now? Gonna ride or die. La, 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 la.
Surkov never responded to our message. Is he the man who created the post-truth world? We would have to live without his answer. We were just putting the finishing touches to our series when one morning his unofficial spokesman sent me a link to an article, freshly published, written by Surkov. No pseudonym this time. It's long and rambling, full of bravado and a bold prediction. Putinism, he says, will outlive us all. The system he built is spreading. He goes on.
Foreign politicians complain that Russia is meddling in elections and referendums across the world. In actual fact, it's much more serious than that. Russia is meddling in their brains, changing their consciousness, and they have no idea what to do about it.
Was this his answer to our question? As ever, Mr. Black Square is one step ahead, writing the ending to our series. It feels like we're all pulling our own strings now, to a tune he composed long ago. Vladislav Surkov, he can sit back, relax. His system runs itself, because the puppet master, he's in your head. And that is it. The Puppet Master was produced by Neil Rozelle. Tom Brignall mixed it. Bridget Harney was the editor. I'm Gabriel Gatehouse. Thanks for listening. You can find loads more great stories if you search for Seriously on the BBC Sounds app.
You know the way late at night, in bed, in the dark, your tired mind can wander and strange thoughts float like balloons escaping into the sky. Well, Bunkbed is a podcast where Peter Curran and Patrick Marber find the nearest faraway place from the hurly-burly of daily life, where tired minds can wander. Why don't you come along and eavesdrop and see if you like it? You can subscribe to Bunkbed on BBC Sounds.